Welcome to the show today. Today I have Dominic Millioud on the show, and he's the managing director of eat.ch. And I'm very, very excited to talk to you today. I'm very excited to dive a little bit into your story and into the fun things that are happening right now. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's maybe start right away with the story, a little bit about your background and sort of like where have things taken you so far. So something very specific that I'm always interested in is how people are shaped along the way. So maybe you can point out one or two moments or experiences that you had along the way that you feel really shaped you as a human being, that really shaped you as a leader.
Okay. So during university, I was self-employed, right? So I got self-employed when I was 19, and I built a little business. It was a service company in the music industry, and it was great fun. So work was always fun for me. And when I finished my university time, music industry was kind of in a trouble, and then I changed to the corporate world, if you like. So I joined Louis Vuitton with Hennessy in the perfumes section, and that was kind of my first touch point with the real world, how big corporations work. And that was kind of a shock for me. So maybe that was a defining moment. And after a couple of years, also then in another company, I just felt that this wasn't the right thing for me. I wasn't built to work in a big corporation. And that was kind of another defining moment for me. It was a tough one because you need to let go something and then go into a different direction. And probably these 2 points were very defining and then also very rewarding in a way, because what then I did afterwards, since I left big corporations, then, it was a lot more fulfilling for me personally than what I've done before.
Very interesting. I mean, definitely some learnings out there already that shaped you and shaped your journey, especially as well along the way. Now, one interesting thing I'm always interested in is the people that shape us along the way.
Yeah.
Do you remember certain people, or can you point out certain people or groups that shaped you along the way?
Yes. So there's been a couple of great examples. I had a couple of colleagues that were very helpful and just helped me grow as a person. I would say if I had to pinpoint one person, it was a coach I had at the beginning when I started to work here for eat.ch. We had the opportunity to have an external management coach, personal coach in that sense. And he was incremental in kind of changing the way I look at things and help me understand a lot of things and become a better leader. So the name is Terry Russell, and he's an amazing person up until today. And I would say he was really an accelerator in my personality, if you like.
I mean, that's a big one. I very often believe that, mentors and coaches shape us very much along the way. Sometimes our wife is our mentor or coach, and, sometimes our boss, and sometimes a colleague, and sometimes a professional coach or mentor. And it's always fascinating to me how different people take different roles in that journey. Now, I'm curious, like, how you got into all of this. I mean, we mentioned the corporate experience, which wasn't really the thing. So you got into a more entrepreneurial setting. But in terms of this whole world of entrepreneurship, this whole world of, I don't know if startup is the right, word. For some people, startup is a company size. For others, it's a way of life. So, but how did you slip into this entrepreneurship world? Was it by accident? Was it by desire, or?
I think it started fairly early. So my dad was independent, and my first job was at 12 years old. I started working in the company of my dad, and that kind of shapes you as a kid and teenager, right? If you have a different understanding of what works means and what it could work and what it could mean for you. And then I mentioned self-employment, and I went to corporate world. And at that time, I just said, look, I think I feel more comfortable in a bit more, a bit more fluid setup where things move quick and, it's a little bit less organized. And I kind of ended up here by, leaving the corporate world and then basically reading in the newspapers that eat.ch, the startup here in Switzerland, they got a joint venture, so a funding and a joint venture with Just Eat in the UK. And I've never heard of it. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun. I looked at it and I called up the founder, and we sat down, and immediately it worked out really well between us. And then I said, well, if you need some support, I'm here. And then they hired me, and 7.5 years later, I'm still here somehow.
It's a great story, by the way. It's also like, take initiative and just simply being entrepreneurial in the whole approach of going about it. I'm curious, like, what is it that, excites you most about, eat.ch, about the industry it is in, the sector it is in, and, the company in general?
I think there's a couple of things that drive you as a personality, right? Things that makes you go, let's go. And one of the things is obviously music that I mentioned before. One thing is food. I was always, my mom is up until today an amazing cook, and it always fascinated me. So, and then entrepreneurship, it's another thing. And what we do here is kind of the combination of a lot of things that are amazing, which is food, which is technology, and entrepreneurship. So it's kind of this combination that is just working out really well. And food is cool because you can work with restaurants. You see all the trends, you see how people think and eat and what they order and when they order. And then you can make it happen through technology, by presenting them a product and giving them a user experience, which is great. And then you can, see the effect of this one. So it's very direct, let's say it this way. There's ingredients, it becomes food, the food gets in a box, and the food gets transported to a customer and is making a customer happy. It's a very immediate, a very tangible experience.
That's an interesting one, definitely. Especially, it's a funny combination of an internet company and tangible impact, because sometimes, this whole world of the internet, so to say, or the internet industry or the sector or whatever, is so intangible. It's a bit like insurance sometimes, it's just, It's all data, but nothing, very tangible at the end of the day. Or maybe it's just a viewpoint, but it's a very fascinating outlook that you have. I want to take it a step deeper, and I'm always very curious about what drives people at the core. Like, what is it? What's that motor? Like, what is that drive there? I mean, what is it that gets you up every day?
I think it's that we still have today the opportunity to shape a company, right? We've grew insanely. We're now a fairly reasonable sized team here in Switzerland, and we're in that, we're situated in that Just Eat company that is operating worldwide. And for me, it's really that immediate impact you can have. It's a fantastic team here, which is fun to work with. And I think what everyone drives here is also that you can really make a change. You're not just you're punching in at 9 and you're punching out at 5 and that's it. And you've done your stack of work. No, it's really, reinventing a little bit what you do every single day. And it's that constant iteration. It takes a lot of energy, but on the other side, it gives you a lot back. And that's basically what drives me.
Powerful. I mean, there's a couple of things. There's, the actual purpose behind the work you do. There's the team, the people you get to work with, also the sort of like the bigger picture of, reinventing things and, partly also revolutionizing certain things in a sector, in an industry. I mean, it's very entrepreneurial. The whole drive is very entrepreneurial. I love that. Now, I want to take a little bit of a step back into the past, I guess, which is about, lessons learned. I'm always curious about what, some of the lessons learned along the way, because I think when we hear about the lessons people talk about and the story around it and the context, there's so many things we can always pull out for ourselves. So can you point out one or two of some of the biggest lessons or learnings that you had along the way?
So I think my biggest lesson that I've learned is that I didn't properly know or understand my why I am here. What is driving me? What is making me, what is making me wake up every morning and being motivated to go to work? And I think I had to learn that, not the hard way, but I had to learn it through a longer period of time, in the corporate world, just understanding there's nothing right or wrong about big corporations. There's nothing right and wrong about small companies and startups. It's just basically what is suiting you. What kind of shirt, dress, shoes are you wearing because it kind of feels good. And I think that understanding what I really need and what really drives me, I think that has been the big accelerator that made me perform better, but also be a lot happier in what I do. So I think this has been the biggest the biggest change. And I would have wished it to happen a lot earlier, to understand it and have somebody, who help you, show you that mirror. But it is what it is. And but I would say this is the biggest turning point.
That is definitely a huge one. And it's not something that many people talk about as well, because it's so, well, intangible, I guess, when you look at it from the outside. So that why, the drive and this and that. But at the end of the day, I mean, also through my own experience, without that, I mean, nothing else really works that well. Even if you're, performing really well and stuff, there's always something missing. There's always a piece missing there.
Yeah.
Some people learn that the hard way, and I think we're also in a generation now where this is sort of like designed and built in from the beginning, which I'm very happy about, because we can avoid sometimes 20 or 30 years of really hard lessons, like the really, not the good ones, the bad ones. And it's such a brilliant thing that you shared there. And I think, thank you for being so open and talking about it.
Sure.
Is there something else that you feel like there's maybe another one that you want to point out, big lesson or a big learning that you took away along the journey?
I think the team and the people that you work with is the next most important one, right? It's just, to be able to share and give people the opportunity to do their own things, their own failure, even, having the calmness to allow other people to do failures, even if it's your company or if you're, the managing director or what, but it all adds to that learning curve that you need to have. If you never, if as a kid, if you never fall down and you hurt yourself, you don't understand that it might hurt, so that you need to run a little bit slower or watch out a little bit in the front. And it's allowing, it's basically empowering people around you. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
I love what you said about children. There's pretty much nobody that's an adult that doesn't know how to walk, right? But we were not born with knowing how to walk. We had to learn it, and we were falling down several times. But it's not like you would say, "Oh no, stop trying." It's not going to work ever anyway. It's like, you go with it with the expectation. If you look at your children, you go there with the expectation of, like, at one point it's going to work. Yeah. You're really going to fall over so many times, sometimes less painful, sometimes more painful. And it's part of the journey. Without it, you probably wouldn't walk at one point. So it's all part of the learning. So it's a great metaphor. And I think as a picture, actually, as a visual demonstration, it's so beautiful if we can take that into the business context as well, because I think it's so crucial, because without actual trial and error, we don't really achieve anything. We don't really go anywhere. So that's a really big one.
The interesting bit also is that the kids have that ultimate drive, right? For some reason, they want to walk, right? And they don't matter if they fall down 100, 1,000 times, however long it takes. Just there's a strategy, and they follow it, and they have an objective to fulfill, and they do it. It's amazing.
And most of it probably unconsciously. Natural drive. But it's very true. Yeah. And I think it also has to do a lot with role modeling. I see it now with my boy. Sure. He no longer wants to sit in his baby chair, so to say, because I'm as his dad. I'm not sitting in a baby chair, right? So he wants to sit on a real chair. So he wants to just, like, he wants to walk like we do and do that like we do. So it's a very interesting dynamic. I want to talk a little bit about leadership in that context as well, because I'm always curious about how people lead their organizations, how they, go about things, daily business, management, whatever. So the first thing I'm curious about, like, how do you make sure you bring the right people on board?
That's the tough bit, I would say. That's the tough bit of my job. It got easier once you have a couple of right people, and then you help them, or they help you through interview processes. It basically comes down top down. So great people hire great people, not so great people hire potentially not so great people. So it's pretty much that top down issue. So and then everything, it's me as a person. I'm very aware how my behavior shapes and influences the people around me. And so does their behavior shape the behaviors and everything around them. So as of today, we have fairly long interview processes, and it involves quite a bit of people just to assure that cultural fit also. So somebody comes in with a skill, great, but a highly skilled person who doesn't match our culture that we have won't work out in the midterm. It might work out in the short term, it's not working out in the midterm. So the cultural fit and basically the values that people carry at the bottom of their hearts, that's important. And the more people who help you see this, the clearer the picture gets, basically.
So this is an interesting one when you say, well, somebody's got a skill, great, but then the really important work starts. Now, when it comes to the culture fit, so you mentioned there's several people involved and it's a fairly long process. So how do you, and I know it's not a off-the-shelf solution, but how do you try to make sure that culture fit is there, or how do you try to identify it? Is it through an assessment? Is it just by getting lots of people to talk to them and then sort of like having a gremium of people to, like, how do you go about that?
So you mean the actual process then?
The actual process, but maybe more in terms of, not every detailed step, but sort of like, how do you know if somebody's a culture fit? And then how do you bring them on board in the right way, I guess?
Yeah. So I think it's a lot about the questions you ask. Interview situation is always an unfair situation because you have a lot more insight on the person that the person might potentially have on you. But you have the unique opportunity to, the way that what kind of mood you create in the interview, and then what kind of questions you ask that will help you understand the person. And again, there's no right and no wrong. The question is really, does it fit? Is it that piece of puzzle that you look for in your team? And if you ask right questions and find out, it's good. And you get better over time. I feel like we've gotten better over time. It still doesn't prevent you from taking wrong decisions, because again, it's an unfair and an unnatural situation being in interviews, and you can do 3 or 4 of them. You will figure out once the person is here and the first couple of weeks are being done, then what you actually got.
That's also an interesting thing there that you just mentioned. You can do a lot in an interview process, but then you'll know after the first couple of weeks, which is also like, I guess what I'm hearing there is like, it doesn't make sense to try to absolutely have everything perfect in the interview process, because actually the decision will be, partly as well when they're here and when they're in the environment and everything. And that's really where the culture match is then proven, if it works really or if it doesn't work. So if people are on board now, how do you then ensure that people actually work together?
That comes in fairly natural, I think. Before, so we moved into this office here, which is an open space, and before we had 4 flats in 2 different houses. So that's not helping in working together, right? So an open space has a lot of upsides. It has some downsides, obviously. There's not the singular perfect solution. For us, this one here works really well. So you don't have blockers, you don't have walls and doors and leaving houses and stuff. That's probably a very basic one. But then we have joint objectives, basically. So we work with objectives on a company level. We break them down into the departments, and very often they're joint objectives, mean you need the support from department X, and department Y then is the owner of the objective. But it's, everything is kind of interrelated. We don't have that separation that, marketing needs to work and sales then needs to follow. No, it's joint processes, basically. And we have a one-to-one culture. So I have weekly one-to-ones with all of my direct reports. So do they. So it's being cascaded down, if you like. And there's a lot of joint and interdepartment one-to-ones. So we have really that culture of sitting down and assuring that they work together. And of course, it helps that we are a reasonably sized team. I think it's a lot bigger if you have, in one office you have hundreds of employees. Of course, then it gets bigger, but then it has to be lifted from top down again. If you see that the department heads or the directors are working well together, there's joint presentation, there's joint objectives, then again, the other one will feel it, and there's not that, I'm not talking to this department kind of feeling.
So there's a lot of co-creation spirit in this. I love that. It's very interesting because when you get to, when you allow people to co-create something together, the working together is built in to the design. Yeah. It's very interesting when it comes to co-creation. I mean, what you mentioned in terms of objectives leads me to the next question, which is, so you mentioned a little bit about how it works, but how do you work with objectives, I guess is my question. So on the one side, how do you make sure, so every company has objectives, strategy, goals and things like that. So how do you make sure these are accomplished or things are moving definitely towards them without having things micromanaged?
So what we changed and what we have today is a very top line set of objectives where we want to go. And then they cascade it down, but it's not, it's not 40 of them, obviously. So you have them very top line. And then the departments need to figure out what they need to deliver that objective. And during that process of weekly one-to-ones, this is a small part of the catch-up where we just give a quick update on those 5, 6, 7 things that we've defined for the quarter as objectives, and then you just talk about what are we, what has happened, where do you need support from me, how can I support you, where do I need to unlock some things, etc. So that's basically it. But then how the departments are doing it, they're free to do so. This is why you should hire capable people, obviously. And then I'm just the coach at the sideline, And then sometimes, since I'm a fair while in the company, sometimes I play with. Sometimes they come and say, "How would you do it?" We don't know. We have those 2 options. We don't know what to do. And then I can, sometimes help with the experience that I have and just do so. And then it's, it's not the micromanagement bit. It's just being on top of things. How they do it is up to them.
I love, that separation as well, sort of like saying, well, we got a good idea, sort of like where we're going. And then it's to the departments to co-create that with, these objectives. And then on the how level, it's basically, whatever works in alignment with the overall strategy and with the company culture and the values and things like that. That's it's very powerful. It sounds very simplistic. Of course, it's not always that simple. To actually get it done and stay on track with that every single day with all the challenges that come up. And that's also the other thing that I wanted to ask you about. So a lot of this has to do with trust. You want to trust in the process that you bring on great people, that you bring on capable people, that people, you want to trust in the universal mindset that people are smart, people are capable of things, right? That people are not cheap, that they are, actually, they have initiative and things like that. So maybe it's a bit of a philosophical question, but how do you let go of control and simply trust people?
It basically is that at one point you need to let go, because otherwise you will never figure out whether it flies or it doesn't. So if you have capable people that you are convinced this is the best person, and the person basically is smarter than you in hopefully generally, but has a deeper understanding and a deeper experience in the field they're working, whether it's operations or technology or sales or marketing, and they can convince with plans. They help me understand the why. We want to do this one, and this is the reason why. This is the rationale behind. And basically, this is usually the moment. I'm a super curious person, and this is usually the moment where I go like, that sounds reasonable. That's kind of okay. Or at least if we all say we don't have a clue whether it works, the risk is kind of, can be formulated and say like, this is the risk. Should we do it or not? And usually we go for it. So it all comes with, jumping over that cliff and letting go. and then seeing how delivery is and how the objectives are being set. And then obviously if things go wrong, you have those weekly catch-ups where you see, are we going into the right direction, or is it going completely somewhere else? And there you can then fine-tune a little bit. But it's a tricky bit that I had to learn for myself with the growth that we had, because you're adding so many people and you grow and you have so many orders. At one point of time, you have a necessity to let go. So sooner or later, you can't be a control freak. Otherwise, you're killing yourself.
That's a big one. I mean, one thing I heard in there is going back to the why as well. You know, what you mentioned is if people convince with the why, there's a good sign that you can definitely trust them, because if they know the why behind it, there's a natural drive to make things right, to go in the right direction with that why. And then of course there's the catch up along the way and the adjustments and everything, which is also natural. But it's also that the barrier when it goes like, well, if you don't let go, you're always the bottleneck. So the growth stops at you. Very simple.
Exactly.
And then the question is, can you live with that or not? Right. And if you can't, then you gotta let go. It's just it's only a must. That's what I got out of this. It's really powerful.
And the ability to disagree, because, you know, again, you hire people, I hopefully hire people who are smarter than me. So if they have a different view on things than I have, fair enough. But then let's put it to a test. Let's give it a try. So you need to, you know, empower people and agree to disagree, and then maybe say, okay, let's give it a try. And I don't blame you in the aftermath. It's all about a learning process. And I think if that culture is being created, it's easy to let go. It's also easy for the department heads then to show up and say, basically, this is where I messed up big time, and this is why, and this is what we've learned. So this is super important. And if you're the control freak, you don't empower people.
Yeah, and this putting things to the test is really interesting, because sometimes we can argue for weeks about something, and we can get rid of that discussion pretty quickly when we say, let's put it to the test.
Yeah,
really interesting one, and just let's put it to the test. I mean, most of the time that's the courage, you know, that's the courageous option, which is let's put it to the test. You know, the weak option is let's just debate it. Let's just keep debating, you know, because it just sucks the energy out of you, but, you know, it doesn't require much getting out of a comfort zone. Putting it to the test does, because you may be wrong, you know, and that's a really interesting one. The last question I have is a little bit up in the clouds. So let's imagine for a second you're a magician now, and you got a magic wand that you can wave, and you can wish for anything in the world. So you got this genie wish right now. What is something that you would wish for that could multiply the impact that you have many, many times?
That's a very difficult one here. Spontaneously, I would say two things. One is a more entrepreneurial spirit, that people, particularly in this region here, that people have a bolder sense of taking risks and thinking holistically, and not only in their little thing. And it probably translates back, and that's my second point, again, to how, you know, what is the culture in which we are raised. Don't get me wrong, I love my country and I love what we have here. But I think where we can get better at is helping people understand earlier what they actually want, give it to a trial. I love the concept of, you know, having kids in the offices, just to see what real life looks like. It's being prepared. So when I went to university, I've never seen a university. I don't know how to. I just got confronted with the university thing, and you're just like, oof, I'm completely overwhelmed. So it's probably, you know, coming back to the other point is again the why is, you know, is allowing kids and in school and at university, allowing them to think more freely and think entrepreneurial and think and help them understand what they actually want. There's nothing wrong working in a 9-to-5 job. If this makes you happy, hey, there's no wrong about this one. But there's a lot of people in that job, you know, lots of friends of me who are in there, but they're kind of locked in a situation where they say, I would love to do something else, but somehow I can't, or I don't have the courage to do so. So it's probably more courage.
More courage is a big one. Yes. It's a very deep one as well. Really appreciate, you sharing the story and lessons and all kinds of interesting golden nuggets along the way. So Dominic, thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to link below this video to some of the sources, company page,
Cool.
Your LinkedIn page as well. People can follow, what cool things the company does, but also what cool things you're up to, and of course connect as well. So Dominic, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Again, thank you very much for having me.